Hello and welcome to everyone here. Also, I want to allow me to say welcome to people behind the camera lens. I thank you for joining the Reflective Dialectic today here. And we're going to very much talk about human diversity or identity politics and a little bit of the value of life. And important will be also to look at your wellness as communicators within this narratives. It is very important for you to navigate these identity politics and have the tools to be able to do it. So the tools is the things we're going to look at today. My name is Philip, and I shall present this reflective analysis sessions for you. Just for a little bit of transparency, when I look at identity politics, I value it through the origins of knowledge framework. I'll get to that later on. But for today, I'm going to look at the lens or framework which is called an objective of a modernity framework, and those of you who studied social science will be able to recognize it, especially if you've done research. So that's what we're going to do today. I'm going to critically evaluate that. Let's get started. What will we call this? I just call it the paradigm dialectic for short. But you can look at it as a mental framework for the construction of knowledge. Mental framework is all in the mind. And construction or the ordering of information, if you don't want to say construction of knowledge. I prefer the latter. So, it is to give the framework is to give us some utility. That utility is understanding the information, but it's that very utility which is also its downfall. And that is why we're going to critique it today. So how is it going to work out? I'm going to start by explaining the term dialectic. Now, you will say to me, but this is not a dialectic. I do agree, but it's kind of a pseudo-dialectic, and I'm going to explain that to you today. Then afterwards, I'm going to just explain the whole system for those of you who haven't worked with it before. Sorry for those who have worked with it, but there are people here who have never seen it or worked with it. Finally, I'm going to give a little conclusion, but I'm also going to do a practical session. Now, a practical session normally go after you've completed the theories, but we're going to try this by intertwining the two, see if it works better. And what I can promise you, or I pledge, but I will be critical, but I'll try and be fair as well. So let me give the philosophical background first. And that's important to understand this dialectic because it actually comes from an old Christian tradition. And if you don't know that, you have a problem. So, especially when you are getting involved in discussions around social issues like identity. So, the term dialectic was actually formulated by a philosopher called Hegel about 200 years ago. And it went as follows. The term dialectic is related to dialogue, and it's the ability to inquire into opposing positions. So, you say this, I say that. And it relates to metaphysical conditions. Remember that word, metaphysical because that's very important in what we're going to discuss. It's not science. And there's also some contradictions, and it's actually trying to solve the contradictions. So it's all in search of answers, and it's what is salient in the head. That is actually what is going on. So what did Hegel tell us? Hegel said, let me just get it there. It works like this. I have an idea. Let's call it a thesis. You have a different idea, a counter idea. You don't agree with me. So you've got an antithesis. Then someone else comes along and he combines the two. And he creates a synthesis. Now, the thing about the synthesis is it's on a higher level of abstraction. It kind of raises the argument. And then the synthesis becomes a thesis for the next round. So we complexify knowledge all the time. Right. Now, what does a synthesis do? It's a dynamic system of self-realization of intelligent patterns. That's in short. It's on a higher level of abstraction, as I've said. It seeds new ideas. As I said, it becomes a thesis. And new ideas emerges from this. So, Hegel called these ideas and how it manifests, this patterns of intelligence, he called it the Geist. You will remember the term Zeitgeist. So this is where the Geist comes from. Now you know that as well. And this Geist is what drives cultures, human cultures. So it's called Geist, is spirit. It's a kind of spirit that kind of informs cultures of how to conduct themselves in their environments. Now, there's a few conditions in which is necessary for a dialectic. And that becomes important when we're going to look at this, the conditions. First of all, the thesis and the antithesis is interconnected. It's integrated. And there's an interdependency of a system. That's very important. The next is there's a constant change, a constant progress of creating new information, synthesis. There's also a lot of qualitative information which kinds of compiles together and then can pull through to quantitative information or quantitative analysis. That's also important. And it's necessary that you exploit the synthesis. A synthesis which can't be exploited, it can't be used, it doesn't have utility, is of no use to us. So, how or where actually did this lens come from? Now, it's very ancient, but I'm going to start with Descartes, who lived around about 1600. That's a couple of years ago. And Descartes was still working at a time where the Catholic Church was very important and dominant. And science was just beginning to evolve. And there was a lot of, how can I call it, a whole lot of, they weren't so happy with science, let's call it that. So Descartes was actually in mathematics, and on one day he decided that mathematics is so valuable but it's actually the mind. You can, if you've got enough mathematics, you create a mind. That is what mind is. It's mathematics. Now, as I said, the church was very important at the time, and Hobbes was a person living at the time which wasn't happy with that. And he said, that means I can build a machine and I must just give it enough information and that machine will become conscious. Now, Descartes was very worried about this. This was an allegation he couldn't let go. So he said, no, it wasn't that. There's a mathematics, that kind of mind, which is materialist. And then there's a different way, which is, he called the qualia, which is the way we love, the way we smell a rose. He said, and consciousness is more related to the qualia than to the quanta, which is the mathematics. So what did Descartes do here? Descartes actually created a divide between our emotions and our cognitive abilities, our qualia experiences and our calculative ways of doing things. And this you can still see here, the objective part and the subjective part. So what Descartes did, he said there's no connection here. Absolutely no connection between these two. So, let me read to you what Hegel then used this idea, and he came up with the following. When he put it into the dialectic. Hegel described the mental processes, a higher order irrational imagination that creates structures of ideal, rational, physical, lower order reality itself. We call it idealism. It is a multiplication of irrational, subjective, intelligent patterns, which are then constantly transformed into more rational, objective intelligence. He wasn't very clear about the process. But what did he say? He said, no, we experience subjective reality. And when we experience subjective reality, then we build up this knowledge through qualitative experiences, and it can sort of emerge as an objective, a qualitative, or a mathematical idea. So he tries to move from here to here. And we call that idealism. Put more easily, what Hegel is actually saying is, we think of reality in the mind, and then we transport it or project it, and it becomes a reality we experience. So, there's no reality outside which we sense and then work upon it. It's all constructed in the mind. Now you know what idealism is, for those of you who didn't know. But what happened at around about the same time, and you must remember, this is about 1850. Mills came around in 1843 to be exact, and he said, science is starting to evolve, but it's still very, very much a disruptive, and it's a little bit of this, a little bit of that. Let me create a structure for it so that we can talk about it. If there's no structure, we can't talk about it. So what did Mills do? He wrote a book which he called Systems of Logic. This was in 1843. And what he actually did, he unified the natural and cultural, the social moral, sciences into an objective system of logic to serve mankind for the good, but he ignored the qualia experiences. So what Mills did in his book, he said, we can study reality and we can, in the same objective manner, study cultures and people. But what did he do in doing this? He kind of cut the qualia, the how do you smell a rose idea. Remember, this was 1843, and science was very different to what it is today. But if we look at these, this dialectic, what did the dialectic do for us? Well, Marx came along, and Karl Marx, lived from 1818 to 1883, so also in this 1850 time period. And he looked at the thesis and he looked at the antithesis and he said, hang on, I've got a different idea. The thesis now is the capitalists, the people with power. And the antithesis is the poverty, the poor people who has to work and sweat, and they don't get much for it. They live in really bad conditions. And he also suggested the synthesis. And he said there's only one synthesis. There's only one way to go from one, to connect to one with the other. And how's that? Well, the revolution. You must be radical about it. You must go to the streets. You have to overthrow the thesis. There's no synthesis here. The synthesis is a revolution. It doesn't connect the thesis and the antithesis. It actually, the antithesis kills the thesis. That's no synthesis, as far as I'm concerned. But that is what he did, and the result was communism. So it was a social system based on very much capital. Now, a little bit later, or around about the same time, Weber came along. Weber lived from 1864 to 1920. It was a little bit later. He said, I actually agree with Karl Marx, but you can't kill the thesis to get to the synthesis. The synthesis is not revolution. If you connect the thesis and the antithesis, those with money and those have to work for money, you need some utility. And he had this utilitarian view. He was a philosopher, of course. And he said that the poor people must use some of the talents to support the rich, and the rich must use their capital and their talents to also help the poor. There must be some integration here. But his views never got anywhere. I would have agreed with him, but unfortunately he got nowhere. Then much, much later, another person came on the scene, and he said, it's okay, but Karl Marx said that the thesis is of poor, wealthy, and the antithesis of poor. But this is a money thing. It's about capital. What about genes? Can you get a superior nation, the thesis, and subordinate nations, the antithesis. And that person was, of course, Hitler, Adolf Hitler. And what happened? Karl Marx turned into communism. Hitler redirected the non-theistic and non-supernaturalistic Gnostic understanding of sacredness and Nietzsche's will to power and his anti-Jewish sentiments towards a totalitarian, imperialistic Nazi regime. Now we all know what happened then. We had World War II, a lot of bloodshed, and in a way it was the dialectic about genes of Hitler fighting the dialectic of capitalism of Karl Marx, the Russians. So both regimes, and in this war from Hitler's side, both the Jews and the Gypsies paid the price. Both regimes, Nazi Germany and Communist Russia, fixated on an ideological belief system, absolute conformity, totalitarian leadership. So if you hear the word totalitarian leadership, a red light must go on. Always. Whenever you hear that, a red light must go on. Think about Hitler. Think about Karl Marx. Now, they promise you a new utopian outcome, but we can now judge the utopian outcomes. Now, people have said communism wasn't implemented correctly, Nazis wasn't really wrong. You still get those people around. They don't look back and see the reality. They see what they want to see. So I think that is about enough for the history. And now let's look at the lens itself. I already said that this was created to categorize knowledge and make it easier for people to understand what's going on. And I've kind of referred to it as starting in 1850, around about. So what happened in 1962? Let's get closer to our times. Is a person by the name of King came up with the word paradigm. Now, those of you who studied social science would have read and learned, you were taught that King created this word. He coined this word. He did not. He got it from his teacher, but he popularized it. So remember that. That's important to me. Now, let's look at this paradigms. Why is this important? It's important because it influences the way we talk, influences the way we think. It actually influences the way we argue about identity politics. But some people in these arguments do not even know the system. That's what you would say to me, but they're still using it because that's what they've heard from people who do know. So they don't know they are using it. Now let's look at the system. And what we have here is modernity, which look at external reality and try and find our way to why we exist, how we exist, and what we can do about it. And they are very objective. Now, what does objective mean? I'm going to leave that one for a later session. But I would like you to go and look at your dictionaries and just familiarize yourself with it. And then there's a postmodernism. First, there's the idealism of Hegel. Remember, idealism, I think what reality is, and then it just happens. And it's very subjective because it comes from a mind. I can change it anytime. I just change my thinking. It's interpretive as well. And where this one looks at the external world, this one at the internal world. But now I have to tell you, or ask you, what's the internal world? Is it the body? Everything the side of my skin? And that's the external world? I think not. I want you to understand that the internal world is only what you think. Even your brain, which is doing the thinking, where that process is happening, is the external world. It's only that which you think, which is the internal world. That's a very important distinction, and it's never made. So, modernism is about capital, the way we do things, and it's about science. When it's used within the system, we're not very clear, but I'll get to it within a moment. This postmodernist system over here, which is subjective, has got like a double personality. One is the one that Mill said, it can be objectively studied. I can look at a piece of literature and I can study it from a language point of view. But it's also for idealism, the subjective, where we feel about things. It can't be studied with science, with mathematics. So it's got a dual personality, and when you study this, please make sure you know which one is which. Social radicalism doesn't have this problem, but it doesn't like idealism because it doesn't want to create a synthesis. It actually wants to have a revolution and demolish any thesis. Now, let's just, for now, you might say that you don't get it. Because what you've learned is that it's monism, idealism, and constructionism, or social constructionism. There's different words for it. What you have is this is empirical, and it's quantitative. It's physical reality. This is mental reality. All of it is mental reality, is subjective and interpretive. This part, the social power reality, it's about politics. It's dialectic analysis. And this is where the dialectics comes in with the system. It's actually over here. But we've already seen that it's not a proper dialectic because Marx doesn't integrate, neither does Hitler integrate. The one demolishes the thesis and the other one the antithesis. But it's power, it's politics. Identity politics, human diversity, and the value of life. Everything you hear, everything you talk about, it's all here. It's all Karl Marx or Adolf Hitler. We still talking about them. Some of us hate them, but we're still talking about them. There are those of us who still like them. So, that is what the system is all about. What came about 2010, we're now very recent. I was born around about that time, I think, 2010. Probably not. Now, modernism came to light. Now, what is modernism? Well, I first called it postmodernism, and then I realized it's not going to work. What they tried to do is they tried to integrate social radicalism, kill for a living, and idealism. Not the interpretive part, not the objective part, the idealism part. We think reality and reality will be. So that's what the meta-modernists are doing. Where you find this is very much in the arts and literature. That's where it actually has a purpose. But it just gets thrown into the political sphere, into identity politics and diversity, human diversity. I always say human diversity for a reason. Because if you just say diversity, what are you talking about? There's diversity everywhere. But what's not here? And this is one of my big problems with it. What's not here? It's pre-modernism. Creationism. How did the world come about? It was created by God. It's not here. And God created it, and reality existed, and we had to deal with reality, and it's all deterministic. It's God's plan. And this is where the metaphysics comes in. Remember I told you to keep that in mind? This is about metaphysical ways of thinking, how to get rid of the contradictions, get a synthesis. But the actual, let's call it religion part of it. And religion is a very new word. It's not it was always called spiritual. That's not even here. And that to me is absolutely, I can't really support this because of those things. So, now that we've done that, let's look at a few important things to state. We must first know that this is a philosophical concept. It's got no place in reality. And I've already said the creationist paradigm wasn't there. And I've already said metamodernism is new. And this is because it's got these paradigms, but I call it a paradigm dialectic. So it's old news or it's young wine in an old barrel. That's what it actually is. It's an anagogic process, and anagogic refers to the leader that speaks above the people, a higher form of knowledge. And the old philosophers, Plato, Aristotle, Socrates, they said, and especially Plato said, that you must move from the cave where you see shadows, the subjective area, to the light. You must get enlightened. And then you will see the external world, what's real. And that's what Onagaga is. And it's expected of leaders to go through this process, to move away from a subjective, not to move into it as if it creates reality, but to move away from it, to get enlightened and to move into the real world. But we didn't know. That information is 2,500 years old. And here I am today talking about it again because we didn't learn the lesson in the first place. So I don't expect the human race to get there in the next 2,000 years. So let us go on and say, how is it possible? I said that this was a projection from the subjective to the objective. What do I mean by that? If you go and read about modernism in your books of social science, you'll see all kinds of weird and bad things about what modernity is. It's all things bad. That's the one thing I can tell you, according to your academic books. Now, if I talk about science, especially if you write scientific journals, you do research, and you'll see this there. All created here. Remember, we're talking identity politics, human diversity. Now, when this was created, and what they are projecting from here to here, is science was just something new. It was just started. And it was focused on content only, how things work together. And it was the struggle just to be for science. They had to fight the Christians, they had to fight the Muslims, they had to fight religion in order to exist. So they were studying what was to be, they still had a long way to go. And education, well, education was for the aristocrats, the sons of aristocrats. And industry was a sweatshop. That's what it was. It was coal, steam, and smog, and a lot of sweat. And those people didn't get a lot of money. Remember, this was a time before cars, telephones, electricity. Electricity was just started to be experimented with, and locomotion, the steam engine was just started to be experimented with. And some of it was becoming commercial. And it was definitely before cell phones and the internet. I don't know if you know that. And it was about low wages. And people doing labor work was not educated, were not educated. The military, they were still expanding. The European countries trying to conquer the world and make colonies of everyone so that they could exploit them. And as I already said, the social conditions for the working class was very bad. So when Karl Marx said, kill your employer, well, people kind of related to that. So that's the 1850 view of science. And I promise you, that is still what, when the radicals talk, that's how I see it. They still read Karl Marx. They don't realize 200 years has passed. They just don't realize that. Now, Science is now about context, and it's even about complexity. And it's becoming very important in our lives because all our technology comes from there. And education, higher education, opened up to everybody. Now there are programs to get the poor to be educated, to get the disadvantaged to become educated. So it changed already. Industry, it's hard to find manual labor these days because it's all technology. And if you're not technically trained, you've got a problem to find work because machines took over. Automatization, we call it. And now we've got AI coming in. Capital changed completely. There's a big middle class. And we tend to forget that. Colonies is no more. They've all got their freedom. I don't say that the European countries don't interfere still in their old colonies, but at least they've got freedom. And the laws changed as well. Women can vote. Everybody can vote in the Western world, in what we call democracy, Western democracy. We'll get to the word Western democracy later on, but for now let's just stick to it. So, why is this not working? Remember we said a dialectic had to do certain things? What we've got here is we've got the thesis, and the scientists and the capitalists are always looking at the thesis, making it better, making it more. On the other side, the radicals and the idealists look at the antithesis and they make that more, they intensify that. That's important to them. And all we do to intensify the antithesis, they are radically opposed to modernity, the people with a thesis. Well, they just ignore these as far as they can, possibly can. It's not always possible. So there's no interconnection between the two. Absolutely no interconnection. So it doesn't work. It doesn't provide us with a synthesis we can exploit. And that's that story. I can go on for a long time. There's a whole lot of things which I can say. What's important is a split between the external objective rationality and the subjective irrational or romantic solutions. The irrational. So romantic we can also call idealism romantic. So the split is between the external objective rationality, external objective rational, and the subjective irrational and idealist or romantic utopian view. We must remember that. It seems to be chronological to me because it's post and post-post and pre-modernism. But it's not actually. And I already said it was an art. And what we need to do is we have to find an interconnection between the two, or what I can call an entanglement. So, what actually is happening is modernity, or science will tell you, is a great unity in life. There's a great unity in our experiences. What the postmodernists did, they created a duality. between objective and subjective. So they impose this duality onto a bigger unity, and I'm all for the unity. So, conclusion. Therefore, the paradigms are not only exclusively unique and stuck in the past, but the framework is not inclusive because it excludes a deep cultural, religious paradigms. That is my final critique on the structure. Now, let's just get down to it. I want you to think about two things. With a human mind created artistic agenda, it can create excitement and release meaning in art and literature. This is what the irrational can do. It can talk about art and literature. It cannot talk about science. So if I've got a human-centered agenda, I talk about literature and things like that and art. If I've got a political agenda, I can bring chaos, intolerance, violence, and loss of life. So it's a very bloody business. But in academia, it's a default choice. So think about all those research you did. You didn't know this, did you? Now, I said I wanted to pose two questions to you, and then I said something else. Here's the two questions. Are each one of us aware that good intentions and structures of logic that oppose oppression can turn into bad intentions and systems of flipped oppression? This is exactly what happened between idealism and communism and Nazism. Second question. How must we change our mental processes to escape mental traps? What I'm trying to say is if you can create reality in your mind, you also create a mental trap for yourself. And how can we escape that? And now, let's put in the practical system. For next time around, I want you to go onto YouTube to MSNBC and we'll read out. I'll give it to you later. Joy Reid, June 22, 2021, who talks to Kimberly Crenshaw, who said she coined the term critical race theory. I want you to watch it, critique it, and next time we come here, we'll discuss it. I'll give my critique, and then afterwards, we will critique it all together. Now, thank you for your attention, your curiosity, and your time. Until next time, thank you very much.